All right.
Okay, my guest today, Dr. Kieran Kennedy. Geez, what a rap sheet you've got. I'm going to let you introduce yourself rather. But I think I'll kick off with the premise that when Michael was setting this up and suggesting that you would be a good guest for me to talk to, the clincher was that there's a photo circular around of you topless, wearing a pair of footy shorts and a stethoscope and not much else. So giving a double cobra at the front too. So when I heard that, I was like, for sure, we have to sit down with this guy. And for anyone listening, it's been probably a month, 6 weeks, maybe longer, kind of in the making. Obviously, when you're in the health field, things have been pretty turbulent for the last 6 weeks. I know you've just come off a set of nights as well, so I'm super grateful for your time. But yeah, if you want to give us give us the big bio.
Ooh, I don't know how I can follow on from that, mate. And I'm gonna have to hit Michael up about outing me on any photos that are going around online. But yeah, no, thanks so much for having me, man. And thanks again for putting up with me mucking around with times. But as you say, the hospital is a little bit of a crazy place to be right now, and have just come off a round of night shifts, which were full on, but pretty rewarding. So no, it's nice to be back to daytime mode. And I guess as a bit of an intro, if I can follow on from that somehow. So I am a doctor working at a public hospital in Melbourne at the moment. And I'm basically at the end of my psychiatry residency. So that's even confusing for those of us that are in medicine to work out what those terms mean. But basically, it means I'm nearly at the end of my specialist training to become a psychiatrist. So mental health is what I do day to day. But I've also, I guess, in a professional but also a personal sense, have a big have a passion for kind of where physical health and mental health meet. So really into fitness stuff and talking about kind of that mind-body link and things as well. So yeah, it's been an interesting time to be working in my field and to be doing what I do at the moment because a lot has changed in the space of a month. So,
yeah, for sure. I mean, look, COVID's obviously something that's dominating most conversations at the time, and I think definitely that'll be something that we kind of circle back to. But as we we're kind of saying in a little bit of a preamble, but before we started, I definitely want to peel it back right to the basics. I think more so for like my own kind of understanding as well. I think definitely men's mental health in particular has been coming more and more to the forefront over the last couple of years with initiatives like Movember and Are You Okay and stuff like that. And it's definitely encouraging to see that the conversation is encouraging for men in particular to speak up and but I guess for me, even before that, I'd love to understand a little bit more, and I kind of joked with this earlier as well, that this is really going to be an episode where I pause a lot because I'm even unsure about what can I say? Like, how do I say it? Right. And obviously to anyone listening, if I do say something that comes off a little bit blunt or ignorant, obviously there's no malice with that. It's not my intention at all. And really my intention is to understand. But if we kind of come all the way back, when we use, terms like anxiety and stuff like that in a clinical setting, what's the definition? Like, where does a general level of stress, which no doubt we've all been through, come into a place where it can be diagnosable condition? Like, is that how I would refer to it?
Yeah, no, that's like a perfect way to put it, to be honest, mate. So there was no foot and mouth there at all. And that's a super good question to start with and strip stuff back to, because that's actually one that I get asked a lot, both at work, but then I do a little bit of speaking and writing about mental health and men's mental health in particular. And I think a lot of people out there are still, as you say, a little bit unsure about what mental illness actually is and what is, as you say, a normal or an understandable level of stress or emotion, and what would count as something that that we would need to go and see a doctor about, or start thinking about, oh, is this getting to a space where I actually need to maybe get a bit of help for this? And I guess it's a pretty complex question, but I guess a good place to start is for us to just call out the fact that it's okay to not feel okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that might sound a little kind of airy-fairy, but I mean, there's still a lot of stigma flying around about mental health issues. And I think in our society today, on top of that, we've now got all this kind of media and social media pressure for everything to kind of be perfect and great all the time. So I think a lot of people are moving through things feeling like, well, I shouldn't be feeling anxious ever, or I shouldn't be feeling stressed out about stuff ever, or I need to be feeling happy and great all the time, when actually feeling sad, stressed, anxious can be just as normal parts of our emotional repertoire as feeling excited, happy, relaxed. These are all normal things to experience and feel. So I think that's point number one, is to call out the fact that when it comes to mental health, it's okay to be feeling some of these things. And it's actually really good to be thinking about them as well, because we often don't. We're all about the physical side of health. And for a long, long time, we've let that really dominate mental health in a way. So yeah, I mean, I think just starting that conversation is probably the first place to start for me. But I mean, you ask an interesting question as well about when might it be at a point where it actually is a disorder or a diagnosis or an illness, and that's something people ask a lot, and that again has no one answer, but I think in a way, if something is starting to impact on us to the point where it's really severe and it's affecting how we're feeling and thinking all the time, or it's impacting on our ability to do the things in our day-to-day life that we'd like to be doing or that we used to do, then that can be one of the first signs that something's maybe reaching a level where someone needs a bit of help with it.
Yeah. And that's kind of a similar outline to like an addiction too, right? Like once it starts to kind of impact on our kind of day-to-day, or that's when it's sort of becoming an issue.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, using that sense of, like alcohol or addiction is a clear example of that. There's those, I don't know if you guys had these in Australia, but I'm a Kiwi originally, which you can probably hear. But we used to have these ads on TV that used to say, it's not the drinking, it's how we're drinking. And I guess that was a bit of a representation of, well, it's not actually alcohol itself in some sense, or it's not stress itself. It's how those things are starting to impact on our life, and the impact that they're starting to have, I guess, in a sense of, impacting our health, impacting our ability to be doing the things we want to do. So yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said too, in terms of that it is okay to feel what we would necessarily associate as negative, like connotation to emotions like stress or nervousness and things like that. Because I think there is an element where a level of stress is useful, right? Like it's, if you've got a deadline coming up for work, it's sometimes the motivator that you need to get things done, right? I know for me, like it's always the last hour, right? Like where I'm at the most productive, and that level of stress, it seems to kick into gear. But is there like, and I guess this is going to be another kind of super broad question as well, but is there anything that can be pinpointed in terms of why stress might be, say, useful for one person and completely crippling for another? Even if they've come from, and I don't know if it's like a nature versus nurture question, but even if two people seemingly coming from same family, same upbringing, same school, whatever it is, but kind of have that complete different reaction. Is there some sort of, I don't know, checklist criteria that we seem to be able to say, these kind of characteristics in a profile tend to lead to more of like a nervousness response or et cetera, anything like that?
I mean, there are factors that we know maybe predispose people to experiencing difficulties with their mental health. And those factors can be different for, I guess, different mental health conditions. But I guess in a nutshell, if we're sort of talking about why is the difference there in terms of if two people are experiencing the same stressor or going through the same thing, but reacting differently to that level of stress, it does probably come down to a little bit of that person's biology, like you say, that the nature side of things. And that's where in my profession, in psychiatry and in medicine, we've come leaps and bounds in sort of recent decades in terms of how much we know about the genetic and the biological and the neurochemical side of mental health conditions. So anxiety, for example, can be very physical. I talk to people about that link between the brain and the body. And for some people, stress can just trigger that link to be really strongly kind of flaring up, where it's triggering massive sort of stress response in the body, racing heart, sweat, tension, whereas other people maybe biologically are a little less prone to that link kind of being triggered. But then another really important part to how we all kind of manage stress and day-to-day things are also our experiences. So maybe our early experiences when we were younger, and the things that we've kind of come across and learned in our life in terms of how we manage those things or the impact different things have on us. And then you've got the whole gamut of factors around us as well. What are our support networks like? What's our physical health like? And what are some of the things in our life that can buffer and protect us from the effects of stress? So it's a bit of a melting pot, and that's probably not a very clear answer. But I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head yourself in terms of it is different things, I think, that all kind of come together to make us different in terms of our mental health kind of profile, just like we're all a little bit different when it comes to our physical body as well. None of us look exactly the same. None of us can, squat exactly the same, or, some people are power and other people are reps. And, our mental health is actually the same. None of us are exactly identical there, and so we're all going to be a little bit different in terms of how we react to things and also how we manage things, and that's okay as well.
Yeah. Interesting analogy that you use there in terms of mental health being quite similar to physical health and physical strength. I guess following that line of conversation, how much can you essentially strengthen like your mental health? Like, are you really able to focus and work on things like your perspective and your mindset? And I definitely believe like characteristics like grit, and things like that, where you kind of try to make a habit of overcoming obstacles and challenges, can kind of further cement that as just a habit and behavior. How much kind of is there to that? Is that like something that, even mindfulness, like, are they sort of all kind of tools in the toolkit to help improve strength? Like, again, what's the word? Like, improve mental health, strengthen mental health? Like,
yeah, no, definitely. And I'm like, this is the kind of stuff that actually gets me really fired up. And what I first kind of started doing some of the writing and stuff about mental health, and particularly men's mental health, because for some reason that idea kind of just got lost when it came to mental health in the past. We took up this idea that we could do things every day to benefit our physical health and can kind of protect and boost and build our fitness or our physical health from baseline. But for some reason, on the mental health side of things, we kind of didn't take that same kind of ethos. I think when you say mental health to someone, our instant reaction is to think about mental illness. which is of course super important, and of course we're always thinking about in the same way that we're thinking about physical illness. It's vital that we think about those things, but 100%, like you say, there is legitimate research being pumped out daily now, showing that there are things that we can do every day to I guess, to use that term, strengthen or build and protect our mental health from baseline. And I will definitely point out that having mental illness or struggling with our mental health isn't the opposite of strength. Like it's not weakness to experience mental illness, and to find yourself in a tough spot with your mental health definitely does not mean that you haven't put the work in to strengthen your mind, or that you're mentally unfit.
Mm-hmm.
But 100%, there are things on a daily basis that we can focus on to kind of give our mind and our mental health a really solid grounding, just like we do when it comes to some of the diet and gym stuff that we do for our body. And I mean, you touched on a few of those things as well, like mindfulness and pushing through challenges. Those things can definitely help. But it's interesting that some of even our physical basics can also have a big flow-on effect for our mental health as well. So focusing on things like our sleep, we're learning more about how diet can impact mental health and kind of bolster it. Exercise as well. I mean, obviously I'm preaching to the choir here when I say that, but we know more and more now about exercise and activity actually being super beneficial for our mental health as well. So I think we need to get rid of this idea that if someone experiences mental illness, it's some kind of, I don't know, weakness in them, or moral wrong, or they've been struck down by some random thing, because that kind of takes the power away from us in a little bit when it comes to thinking about, well, there are things that I can do to keep my mind kind of turning over and to give it the best kind of chance of being in a space to be able to cope with some of the stresses that might come along.
Yeah. Tony Robbins is a really big fan of having a plunge pool in his backyard for like that.
I've seen this. Yeah.
Yeah. For that specific, sometimes the best way to change your headspace or your thought patterns are basically to change your physiology. Right. And I think that, a conversation I would have almost daily with clients is that we want you to be active and we want you to be moving for reasons that are far beyond like caloric expenditure. Right?
Yeah.
Yep. So it's always super encouraging when the authorities like yourself come in and back me up.
Well, might be too high a praise there to say authority. But yeah, like this is the fascinating thing about where we're at with medicine in general now, and why I love psychiatry, as well as being a bit of like a classic gym rat or loving fitness as well, because we're seeing more and more that these things aren't mutually exclusive. Like these things aren't isolated from each other, and our physiology, like you say, 100% can have flow-on effects to our mental health, and vice versa. What's going on with our emotions and our thoughts, we know scientifically that has an impact on what physically is happening in our body. There's some fascinating studies out there showing, for example, that mindset or mood impacts surgical healing after an operation, or surgical complication rates. And for me, that is just crazy awesome. Like that's going to make me sound like a bit of a nerd, but the idea that what we're thinking and feeling actually has a physical impact on our body is pretty cool, and it just shows for me the importance of getting rid of this idea that we think about our physical fitness and our health, but we don't really need to think about what's going on up here, because those things are intimately connected. So
it's like a correlation between patients who get imaging done and like a decrease in rate of recovery for like back issues too, right? Once
Yeah.
you've been told that you have like bulging disc or arthritic disc or something, your rate of recovery is like
Well, yeah,
significantly much
yeah.
less. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of scary in a way how much some of what we're sort of thinking and feeling about something impacts the outcome of those things, even very physical things. So yeah, I just find that fascinating, and that's kind of why, on a personal level, I love comboing these things. But also the type of psychiatry that I do is working on medical and surgical wards, and I guess seeing patients who have a physical illness that's interacting with their mental health in some way. So yeah, this is definitely my kind of bread and butter, I guess, when it comes to what I love about what I do.
And I think, you know, it doesn't have to be an extreme example to kind of highlight that too. Like, I think anytime that you get injured or you kind of, you understand like what we're talking about in terms of the effect that that has on your mood when you can't
Mm.
do the exercise that you want to do, or hit the lifts or hit the numbers that you want to hit, right? And it seems pretty small and insignificant when you look at the grand scheme of things, but I know, like, even for myself, like, I've had some stuff going with my back, and it's been probably 3 months since I've really been able to deadlift, and it's just like it's the most frustrating thing, you know, when you like feel like you're doing nothing and like you're still in pain, right? Like, it's
Yeah,
just, yeah. And sticking to the
100%.
rehab is tough too. It's so boring, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely, man. I know a lot of us are feeling that right now. You know, if fitness or the gym or working out is a big part of our life and what keeps us feeling good physically and mentally, I know a lot of people are feeling the hit of that right now, in terms of lockdown and social distancing and things with COVID-19, because, as you say, for a lot of us, I think, even if we're not consciously thinking it, we're very much aware of how important exercise and activity is on a daily basis, just for keeping us feeling kind of in a good space and kind of
yeah.
in a good mental place.
Yeah. So I guess if I throw another one at you, I'm just launching these big broad questions. I'm loving that you're able to narrow it down for me. But
All good, mate.
why, if we understand how significant you know, our thoughts can be, and how profound, like, I guess, like, our inner dialogue, for uh, loss of a better set of words, would be, why is it that we find it so easy to be so critical and so hard, like, on ourselves at all times? Like, a lot of what I've read would suggest that it is, you know, being self-critical is a way that we make sure we're more like socially viable, and therefore like continue to be part of a tribe, and kind of being adverse to being kicked out and left to the wild back in, you know, prehistoric days. But um, I would be surprised if that was entirely the case, given the amount of evolution that we've been through, where it's no longer such a necessarily a life and death matter, definitely in the physical sense. Yet it still seems to be this like resonating thought process of, you know, often the people that you know in your life that are like the kindest to others are so hard on themselves to a
Yeah,
point where it is very detrimental to both their physical and mental health. And so I'm
yeah,
interested in why that is, I guess, essentially.
yeah, yeah. And that's definitely a doozy, mate.
Yeah.
Very deep. I'm sure there are people that are like,
You didn't solve this on like day one of psychiatry school.
I was going to say, I think if we can crack this right now, we might both win a Nobel Prize. But
Fantastic.
yeah, like, I mean, I think it is quite in a way, it's a quite a biological, evolutionary type thing, in a sense. Like you say, I think we're hardwired for connection with others, and we're hardwired, as you say, to stay in the tribe and to survive. And as a species, we've grown with that, in terms of just being so clued into what we're doing and saying and thinking when it comes to others. So I think it's very easy for our mind to fall into that space automatically, in terms of just keeping a constant check on ourselves in terms of, oh, did I say that right? Did I do that right? Do they like me? You know, does she want to go out with me? Like, is he going to dump me? Like, you know, I think we're just constantly doing those mental equations in our head, but because of the importance of that social kind of connection to our survival. So that is ingrained in us. And we know that our brain, just biologically, is much more prone to be alert to the negative compared to the positive. And there are studies showing that, in terms of we're much more likely to pick out and remember something that is negative or a threat compared to something that went well. And in modern society, where we're kind of constantly getting things thrown at us, we're constantly online, we're constantly getting sort of all this feedback about who we are and how well we're doing or not doing, whether it's follow accounts or likes or, you know, text message replies or whatever. I think that kind of amplifies that in a way, and it can be very easy to just kind of follow that habit that our brain has of just jumping to the negative constantly, and, you know, being less prone to seeing the positive. So yeah, I don't know if that was a very good explanation there, but I think in a way it just frames that our brain is kind of a little bit hardwired to just be picking out threats, and that's particularly when it comes to the threat of us not being socially accepted or not being kept in the tribe, as you say, and it can make us very hard on ourselves.
Yeah. Is there, if we acknowledge that it is something that we can improve, right? And even if it is hardwired, what can you do? Like, you know, if you do realize that you are very self-critical, or you tend to be even a pessimist, right? In most cases, which I guess even in itself is like a low level state of depression, potentially.
Yeah,
Is it
pretty
not
hard
just,
to get, can't it? Yeah.
is that like, is it enough to start to just try to almost stop and physically force yourself to reframe like some of those thought patterns? Or like, is that self-awareness, is that enough to start things kind of being pushed in the other direction?
Yeah, definitely. And I think like that's something that I bang on about all day, because I think for most of our struggles with mental health, that's step number one, is that self-awareness and acknowledgement of it. Because it's so easy, isn't it, for our brain to kind of just be running on autopilot, in a sense, the whole day, to the point where we're not really kind of thinking about what we're thinking. And for a lot of us, we're not actually really acknowledging or picking up how we're feeling as well. You know, we're kind of just smashing on through the day, we're busy, we're distracted, not picking up the fact that, as you say, maybe little thoughts are pinging up in terms of, oh, that was rubbish, you know, or the way he said that, clearly it means he thinks I'm an idiot. Or, you know, we can have all these little kind of thoughts running through our mind all day, and if we don't kind of acknowledge them or reality check them, they can kind of rule the roost. And thoughts very much kind of can sort of flow on into how we're feeling, and then come back around in terms again to how we're thinking on a regular basis. So yeah, 100%. If we actually just make that first step to just be more aware of what's going on in our mind at any one time, that can actually make a huge difference. And I guess from a therapy side of things, with this type of stuff, cognitive behavioral therapy, or
CBT.
CBT,
Yeah.
is I was going to say one that we've probably all heard of, but that's kind of one of the hallmarks of CBT, is learning to kind of question and reality check our own thoughts, you know. So, and again, kind of because our brain is a little bit naturally that way, this is something that we can all relate to. You know, I don't know, you catch up with a mate, or you have an important phone call, or you present something at work to a colleague, and there are all those thoughts flying around our brain in terms of oh shit, like I screwed that up, or did they say that thinking that they actually liked it, or was that tone in their voice sarcastic? Yeah, no, they definitely must think I'm a massive screw up. So, and if we don't reality check those things, we just take them as fact. Like what our brain says, we just run with.
The missus is in a big survivor kind of, I don't know what you call it, binge mode at the moment. And it's sort of similar, right? Like when you're watching them scramble before tribal council, and then the way that they get super paranoid, super panicked.
Yeah.
And when you're watching it from the outside, just think like it's so unnecessary, but you can just imagine being in it. And I guess that's essentially what it is, right? When you are in it and you are constantly like reading into things, whether they're there or not. I'm glad you touched on CBT, on cognitive behavioral therapy, because I think it's actually what I'm reading the moment, and I find it super fascinating. And a lot of what they do talk about is that kind of flow-on triangle effect of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, right? But I think the big takeaway that I've got so far is that it's not necessarily A to B to C, but you can affect any one of the kind of trio in order to impact the other two. So so I think even if, and we spoke, and we'll touch on a little bit more as well, but things like your routine, right? Like even if you're having trouble reining in your emotions, or you're starting to try to be more mindful of your thoughts, but it's hard to always catch every negative thought, but just putting into practice some like more serving or positive behaviors can have that flow on effect. And you kind of get caught up in that momentum, right, too. So I think there's a level of narcissism that sort of flows within all of us, that if you're displaying behaviors and actions that make you feel good, you're going to want to continue, going to the gym, getting a pump on, having a sweat, like that sort of stuff. Right. And then it just becomes a bit of a fulfilling prophecy.
Amen. And like you say, with that kind of that ABC, kind of that triad in CBT, thoughts, emotions, behaviors. The great thing about CBT is, as you say, if we're a person who's slightly more aware of what we're feeling and what the emotions are, maybe that's a good place to start. Learning some exercises that kind of can calm stress and anxiety or strong emotion. And that, as you say, can have flow-on effects to thoughts and behavior. Or if we're not so much someone who's plugged into thoughts and feelings, maybe focusing on behavior and the body can be a good way to kind of start to tackle some of those things and the flow-on effects. And I guess the beauty there is it kind of brings us back to that where we started with all this, that interaction between the brain and the body, and the fact that thoughts can very much become behavior and kind of influence the body, and vice versa. Kind of what we're doing and what we're doing physically every day kind of flows back to the thoughts and the behaviors too. Yeah.
Do you think that there's a similar revolution, I guess, going on in terms of now that we are becoming more aware of the importance of mental health and mindfulness, almost in terms of again, for like lack of a better word, like that sort of spiritual development in terms of ideas like attraction theory and like that those kind of terms that get thrown around, like energy and attention and that sort of stuff. You know where I'm going with this? Where like it's almost like that ability, I guess, to like manifest like what you want your reality to be, and how really like your reality is simply just your perception of what's going on around you, but how you are somewhat in control of that. Is that kind of like the next frontier? Like, I guess my question is, like, from what I would understand is that there's an element where the only difference between that and I guess what we would consider like a science like psychiatry is like the amount of research that's being done into it to kind of quantify like those effects. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And like I say, I guess when it comes to some of that side of things, like the law of attraction, and I'm not going to lie, I've watched that movie on YouTube on Netflix, The Secret.
Robert
you know,
Byrne.
when it, comes- when it comes to all that stuff, I mean, it's super fascinating, and like you say, I mean, a lot of the things that we take for granted in psychology and medicine and science now would 50 years ago, for example, have been kind of thought at it as like
Voodoo.
unfathomable. Yeah, well, exactly. So who knows? Like you say, who knows what kind of research and stuff's going to come out in another 10, 20 years. But I mean, it's interesting that you bring up the law of attraction and things, because not taking away from any of the potential kind of spiritual, metaphysical side of things, which obviously isn't my area of expertise, but I'm a very open-minded person. But I mean, some of the principles of that we can actually think about and explain, even just from a psychology side of things. If we are, for example, the law of attraction would have us say that if we are thinking of something clearly in our mind and picturing an outcome and holding on to that, I mean, psychologically, we know that that is going to make our brain far more attentive to things in the environment that connect with that.
Mhm.
So when it's talking about picking up opportunities or having things come along, that may be because we are aware of what's in our thoughts, and we are manifesting that in a way because it's putting our brain in a state where we're far more keyed into picking up some of those opportunities or things as they happen around us.
That would
Whereas,
just be like cognitive bias, same sort of premise.
yeah,
Yeah.
like pretty much, because I was just going to say, because I mean, it's the same when we're in a not so good space in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like if we're walking to work and we get like splashed by a car that's driving along on the side of the road that soaks you, it can start a pretty awful day. And in some ways that would be an example of where our brain is put into a state where I don't want to be at work today. The world's a bloody awful place. Screw this. I just want to go home to bed. And so that's kind of what our mind is, as you say, in a bit of a biased state in terms of picking up. We're going to be picking up all those things at work that happen after that that are really irritating or frustrating, compared to maybe a lot of the things that are also happening that are actually pretty good.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so we can 100% influence those things, even just from a very psychological kind of cognitive side, without the spiritual sort of metaphysical side.
Yeah, I think that's something that we definitely encourage with clients as well, particularly those who are hyper focused on things like aesthetic change. Um,
Mm.
if
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
constantly like looking in the mirror and tell like looking for and talking to yourself about all the things you hate about your body, well,
Yeah.
like it doesn't matter how lean you're going to get if like that's what you're looking for, right?
Yep.
And you're never going to be happy, you're never going to be satisfied, you're never going to be lean enough, right? But to the difference, the opposite of that too, right? Like if you can start to realize, um, you know, the things that you do like, what your body is capable of, and that kind of like self-love kind of path,
Yeah.
you start to see more of it too. You start to notice more change and things like that, right?
100%. And we can kind of start to sway some of that bias in our mind, as you say, for picking out the threat and picking out the negative and just kind of holding that in mind all the time. And I mean, it's obviously a doctor working in a hospital where a lot of work is around medications and a very much a medical model. But something that I do talk to people about quite a bit when it comes to this side of things is the whole gratitude journaling type thing. And that is fascinating to me, and some of the research coming out about that and mindfulness, because in a way, if we're practicing something like that, it is kind of strengthening that side of our mind in terms of swaying the bias more towards picking up the positives or picking up the things to be grateful for. So as you say, if we're kind of making an active effort kind of to force ourselves to pick out some of the good things, whether it's, looking in the mirror and sort of thinking, well, compared to where I was this time last year, I've nailed some of my goals there, or I'm feeling much better physically now, or I can walk, to the shops now compared to not being able to do that last year. If we're kind of forcing ourselves in a way to do that, and we do that consistently, something like a gratitude journal can actually start to get our mind into that frame on a day-to-day basis. And that can have big impacts in terms of how we're feeling within ourselves and with our mood and everything else as well.
Yeah. There's that saying too, right? Like if you and everyone you know stood in a circle and you all threw all your problems and all your shit out into the circle, you'd probably pick yours up and take them back once you see like everyone else's.
I haven't heard that, but I like that. Yeah, 100%. No, and it's true. Like this is stuff that we're all dealing with, and I don't think it matters, how rich you are, fit you are, big you are. Like we're all picking up stuff every day that is stressful, or that we're focusing in on in terms of stuff that's not so good or not so great. So yeah, like you say, we would all have stuff to throw into that circle if we actually did that. That's for sure.
If we steer the conversation, I guess, a little bit kind of more towards current events in terms of its impact on mental health. One of the things that I'm kind of struggling to kind of not comprehend, but contend at the moment is that I feel like there might be a lot of almost premise behind the struggle with being on lockdown that we're going through, and is that it's almost the first time, especially for our generation, where like we've been told we have to do something rather than we're doing whatever we want all the time, right?
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if there's an element of why we are going like stir crazy, getting that cabin fever, or really, for those that are finding it much harder than others. How much of that do you think is that it's just really the first time we've been tested and we haven't yet developed the skills or the ability to like overcome something as challenging as this? I know like my old man was born in a bomb shelter in the Second World War, right? And so we kind of contend that like for the generation coming up, like this is their Second World War story, or this is like their Cold War kind of like, government, like how much do you think of, and I guess you're probably seeing it more than I am, definitely, is that we're just in the early stages of trying to figure out how to overcome this challenge, and that's what the actual kind of impact is at the moment, more so than because to be honest, if you look at it from like a top-down view, it's like, stay at home, just stay at home and chill out. Like that's all you need to do. That's all we've been asked to do, is just like and socialize, right? Like just don't go to bars, pubs are closed, like that's it.
Definitely. No, and in some ways it kind of like you say, you could frame it in a way that would be like, come on guys, like we're just being asked to stay home and watch Netflix. Relax here, like what's the deal? But no, I hear you. Like I think this is completely sort of unprecedented and something that we haven't had to go through before. And the interesting thing is that I guess it's something that we're collectively going through together, not just in Australia and New Zealand, but other countries as well. And I do think sort of whether or not it's a generational thing or not, but this is just such a 360-degree change from what our society is usually like, right? Where we're usually kind of can have that instantly. We can do whatever, not do whatever we want, but we can kind of do what we want when we want. Stuff's open 24/7. We can have stuff
Amazon
delivered,
Prime. Yeah.
or stuff's instantly available. And so in a way, I think this is, like you say, one of the first times that a lot of people might have to grapple with that thing of, okay, well, I can't just be distracted all the time, or I can't just have, this in the hand all the time, or go and do this when I want to, exactly how I want to. And that can be incredibly unsettling for our mental health, I think. We know that any kind of change can be stressful. Even positive change is very stressful to the system, physically and mentally. So just the fact that our usual routines and the usual way we're going about things have been massively kind of changed in a very short space of time, I think it's really understandable why a lot of people are actually sort of struggling with this, because, as you say, it's kind of the first time we are sort of like, oh, what do you mean? I just sort of have to stay home with my own thoughts and entertain myself. So it's hard, yeah. And as you say, people are struggling, and that's something sort of that we're already starting to see in the hospital and with my work, but something that personally I think we're all kind of moving through in our own way as well.
Yeah. And again, like, it's not something that I'm trying to like downplay at all, but I guess, we have become somewhat addicted to always being busy, always being entertained, right? Always working on something where everything's always needing to be done like instantly in a mad rush. That it is unsettling when you have a moment to catch your breath, I guess, because I'm sure for a lot of people, it is the first time either ever or for a long time that they have had to kind of sit at home and do a little bit of self-reflecting, and you kind of, if you all of a sudden you've been let go and lost your job or whatever it is, and you've identified for 20 years, it's like when you meet someone for the first time and they ask like, oh, what do you do? And you like, it's not like who are you? It's like, what do you do? And if that's how you define yourself and you no longer have that, then kind of what does that mean for who you think you are too, right?
100%. And like, that's the same, I think, when it comes to our routines, and the way that we structure our day and our week as well. We become those things in a sense. So it can be incredibly confronting, as you say, when some of those things just aren't there, or we have to change some of that stuff up. And it's good as well that you pointed out, like, obviously talking about this doesn't detract from the fact that there are so many changes and things that are happening right now that are 100% incredibly stressful for people. Like, as you say, people are losing their jobs, people's businesses are under strain. We're worried about our own health and safety. We're worried for our loved ones in terms of whether they're going to be safe and stay well. So there are so many things that are going on here, which are incredibly sort of important in terms of why we might be sort of feeling a bit of that pointy end of the mental health stick right now. But yeah, I agree. I think part of some of that struggle too is that maybe just some of those things that we use to fill up our day and to kind of keep us busy and distracted all the time, the fact that those things aren't there is also, for a lot of people, pretty confronting place to be. And in my own way, I will like freely put my hand up and say that I'm one of those kind of people as well. I guess I'm kind of lucky in a way that I mean, obviously things are pretty full on at the hospital right now, so I'm still busy, but I'm one of those kind of people too. I like to be busy all the time and on the go all the time, and so when my normal routine and stuff, even with the gym closing, for example, was kind of shaken up a bit when this first started, it was a bit anxiety provoking. It was kind of like, okay, well, well, shit, like, what do I do now? And so it's an interesting place that we're all in at the moment when it comes to our mental health, and it's really important that we're actually giving that as much airtime as we are to the physical kind of impacts of this as well.
Yeah, I'm an extrovert on lockdown, so I definitely
So
definitely
you're
feel that.
struggling,
Oh man, like even having to move all my PT online,
mate.
I think that I've definitely, you know, and not that I always kind of knew this, but I think it's just been reinforced that I think I love being a personal trainer because I love the personal side of the training, and it's like, and I guess this is going to lead me into my next question. Um, I find it quite hard to do the PT online because it is harder to form those connections virtually, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I'm quite lucky in that I've been working with all my clients for a long enough period of time that like I know what cues I need to give. I know where they're at. I know like where their level of fitness is, what their goals are, and how to get them there. But I think it would be for me extremely difficult to start with a brand new client who it was their first time doing any kind of activity,
Yeah.
to kind of form that same bond and form that same connection. Because it is like those kind of those chats that you have during rest periods and stuff like that, where like that is done. And when there's a level of camaraderie that's built through like mutual suffering and stuff like that too, right? And a level of rapport and a level of trust. And so how do we, and not just how do we as in like personal trainers who are delivering online content, but like how do we as individuals, like how do we keep connection with our close ones, you know, when it is all online and you can't have that, because I think that's the other thing. And I think for my mum as well, and my family, and I'm sure this is globally across the board, especially with Easter, like the biggest thing has been not gathering in our tribe of 30, which is our family, right? And so it's not so much that socially we can't go out and go to the pubs or the bars or whatever. It's that we can't gather as an entire family, you know, to get through this together to support each other. So how do we, well, what can we do to increase connection or like improve connection when so much of it is being done virtually at the moment? Is it frequency or volume, or is it more like, you know, do you have any tips and pointers for me, like how we can
Yeah,
go?
yeah. No, and I think like that's one of the, you know, obviously we were pointing out before some of the things that are making this period of time pretty hard when it comes to the mental health side of things. And that social side of things is obviously one of the biggest, isn't it? And in a way, it's kind of been a bit of a weird silver lining that it's pointed out to a lot of us how important that social time and those physical kind of connections and presence with each other is. It kind of brings us back to what's actually important and what we're grateful for. But yeah, you're 100% right. And I guess particularly around Easter, when we'd normally be, you know, taking trips to see people, we'd be having big family meals, and just being kind of close to other people and in their presence. Not having that has been really hard for a lot of people. So I think if we're talking about tips there, I mean, I don't think it would be, we're not sort of talking about frequency here. And I think that's important to point out. What we know about social connection and the positive impacts there on our mental and our physical health isn't necessarily frequency or quantity. You know, it's kind of that argument of, well, it's not the number of friends you have or the number of followers you have. It's kind of the quality of some of those relationships. And
It's
I
like
think that's a
reps.
good, yeah, exactly. Exactly. If you want to go for hypertrophy, then you need to find that sweet spot. But yeah, like I think when we're thinking about what we can be doing right now to still feel like we've got some of that social connection, even if it's through a screen or over the phone, I think it brings back the importance of the depth of that connection. So something I've been sort of talking to people about is, you know, now is a good time to be actually kind of just talking about how you're going with all of this, you know, or bringing up the conversation with, your mate or your family member in terms of, this is all pretty shit. I'm finding this pretty stressful. I was feeling a bit anxious yesterday. Because it's when we kind of get into those deeper, more connected conversations that we can still get a lot of the benefits of social contact, even if we're not in the same room, or even if we're not able to hug or do some of those normal things that we would do sort of physically when we're in the same presence as someone. So I guess it would be encouraging people to have that social time, make it a daily thing, plan it, schedule it in, but also just to be aware that, kind of search for the deeper connection at the moment. I think would be a tip to kind of be still making us feel like we're getting some solid sort of social time, even if it's through a screen or over the phone.
Yeah. And I guess if, on the flip side of that, if you are on the other end of that conversation where, you do have a loved one or someone that's close to you telling you that they are struggling or that they've been finding it super hard, any like advice or any kind of direction there on what you can say? Cause I'm guessing like, oh, you'll be right is probably like not the best like, kind of response there.
No, I mean, that can be perfectly fine. I think one of the things with mental health and mental illness that I think makes people feel a little out of their comfort zone is that, is that right? We kind of feel like, well, if we're getting into the nitty gritty or the deep stuff, or we're talking about this stuff, what do I have to do to fix it or help them, or and it's not so much about that. I think if we're having these conversations about our mental health and how we're doing with all of this, we don't have to feel like we have to be a therapist. We don't have to fix it. And what we know is that actually just listening to what they're going through and feeding back of, that sounds really tough, or yeah, I'm in the same space, or yeah, when my gym closed a couple of weeks ago, I felt a bit anxious too. It's more about just sitting with it and listening and kind of, I guess, opening the door both ways in terms of what you're going through as well. We don't have to have any special tricks or specific things that we need to say to fix it or make people feel better. Just being listened to and heard is one of the key things to help someone if they're going through a bit of a rough time.
It's probably, I guess, almost a reflection of kind of where that particular connection is at. If those conversations do feel, quite forced or quite uncomfortable or quite unnatural potentially as well. Like you mentioned before, when we almost at a place where we're striving to show how many connections we have and how many friends on Facebook and blah, blah, blah. But if you've got 1,000 friends on Facebook, but no one to kind of call and, have those difficult conversations with, then what does that say about the quality of those connections? Right.
Well, yeah. And I think that's something that we're seeing at the moment. And again, like I always like to bring it back to a little bit of a positive spin or a silver lining in a way. But, that's something that I think a lot of us have realized as well, and that you're hearing people talking about. Like it's interesting to be like talking with someone and have them say, yeah, I've never Skyped with my family before. It's actually really great. Or yeah, me and my mates have been like keeping in touch heaps and calling a lot. And it kind of makes you think, well, A, it just shows how important that kind of stuff is. But B, also, why aren't we doing that with our kind of nearest and dearest more often as well? And I think it is because in the day-to-day rush of life, we're so kind of distracted and brought into being busy all the time, that sometimes those things kind of take priority over our social connections. And so it is a nice thing actually that this is showing us how important that social time is.
Yeah, I think that silver lining in all of this is important, because one of the kind of memes or posts that I've seen kind of going around lately is like, in that rush to get back to normal, let's just like consider what elements of normal we're in a rush to get back to. And I think that, coming off what you just said, there's almost been, you know, and I'm definitely guilty of this as well, like that always being busy and like working yourself into the ground has somewhat become like a badge of honor, right, within the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
Um, and I think particularly it's a very easy trap too to get into when you do run a small business, is that there's always more that you could be doing, and there's always things that need to be done that you feel like you're putting off, and it becomes, especially in the beginning, extremely hard to not answer emails at 1 a.m. and, you know, to take Sundays off, or whatever it is, to kind of just disconnect and recharge, because you are so directly impacted by the success or the failings of the business. And so I think like that would be one of the things that I would love to see come out of this, is that people realize that that is important, like having that balance and making time still to connect with those that are closer to them, and that having that distinguishment between like that's where work occurs and like that's where work doesn't occur, and being able to separate the two.
100%. And that brings in like an interesting thing that kind of just came to my mind then as well about, you know, there's been a bit going around on social media and online with all this kind of lockdown and isolation periods and stuff, you know, this kind of this productivity pressure, you know, and like you've kind of seen people being like, well, if you're in isolation at home, you need to be using this time productively, and like you need to be like gunning it for your business when this isolation eases up, or you need to be learning a new skill, or you need to be like painting a Van Gogh painting or something. Like, you know what I mean? There's still that pressure to, even now when we're in the grips of a pandemic and a crisis, there's still this sense of, well, if you're just at home and you're not being productive and you're not hashtag hustling, then, you know, like what the hell are you doing? And I think we really need to call that out, because at the moment, with so much going on, so much change, you know, there's a lot of worry and anxiety about our health and our family and our loved ones' health. It is more than enough right now just to be focusing on your health and making sure you're feeling okay.
Yeah.
You know, so if
I think
you're
that,
at home, you know,
yeah,
you
go
don't
ahead.
have to be you don't have to be feeling guilty that you're not, I don't know, like wired in, you know, like Steve Jobs or something, and you're like coming up with 20 business ideas and learning to play the piano in 2 weeks. You know, like we need to give ourselves a bit of slack.
So I'm feeling pretty attacked, because like that, like being productive has definitely been something that I've been preaching. And I don't mean productive in terms of like you still need to be burning the candle at both ends, but I think
No,
that
yeah,
you to go the other way too far as well is not helpful either. And I think
yes,
a lot of the things that I've been trying to tell my clients is that if we've had these huge disruptions to regular routine, then we need to come up with a new routine that is serving quite quickly to become the regular, because if it doesn't, we're still going to come into a routine. It's just going to be one that is not serving. And you're going to go backwards. And now's not the time necessarily want to go backwards either. So there, in terms of productivity, like my kind of thought process has been like, it doesn't have to be some big final product or like some huge deliverable. But I think if you've had a book on the shelf that you've wanted to read for the last 6 months, like start making time in your day to actually start reading that book that you've wanted to read. Right.
yeah, yeah,
Because I believe that like accomplishment and achievement on kind of all levels is like super helpful and super healthy and super positive. So even if it is, you know, that feeling when you get to the end of the book and you're like, oh, I finished it, like whether it was good or bad, or like, or that recipe that you've been wanting to try, or, you know, like maybe now is the time to start doing the mobility that you said you've wanted to do for the last 3 years. So yeah, I think to be a little bit defensive of my position.
no, 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 and that definitely was not calling you or anyone else on that, because I agree. You know, and I've been kind of talking about the same, I guess. And as you say, I think it's about finding that balance point. You know, if you are really finding this tough, and you're in a tough spot right now, worry wise or anxiety wise, you shouldn't be feeling this added pressure to also then feeling anxious and worried about not being productive enough right now. But I 100% agree with you in terms of actually keeping a routine and keeping some sense of movement through the day and achievement is super helpful as well. So that's kind of something that I've talked a little bit about recently as well, in terms of some of the tips for keeping ourselves in a healthy mental space right now, is routine, and making sure that we don't just fall into a space where we're kind of staying in the PJs all day and kind of on the couch all day, because for a lot of people that's not helpful. And to still feel like they've got a sense of routine to their day, and they're still kind of ticking through some things and getting some things done during the day, as you say, is super important for our mental health too. So it's a bit of that sweet spot kind of Goldilocks mentality, isn't it? Like,
but I think, like, even just finishing like starting an 800 piece puzzle and like working your way through it, right? Like, it doesn't have to be something that's super high achieving, but
exactly.
I think the importance of it's almost, what are we now, like kind of 4 weeks into sort of lockdown here in Melbourne, and I think it's getting to a point where personally I feel that, like, we've had like our big initial kind of change, and it's almost like the excitement is kind of starting to level out now. But I think, if anything, as we head more and more towards winter, like, not having a routine is going to become harder and harder and harder as it gets wetter, colder, more miserable. The days become shorter. And I know, even for myself, like with daylight saving last weekend, it's like 6:30 now. And I'm like, may as well go to bed. It's dark. It's cold. Like,
It's hard. Like you say, if you've kind of spent the whole day in the house, that can be bloody tough when it comes to
and there's not even any footy to watch or anything else, right? Like, that's the worst part in all of this.
Extremely dry at the moment, isn't it?
There's like the sports section is like a 30-second recap.
There's only so many times you can watch those reruns of Friends on Stan or whatever it is. So I completely agree. Sort of, as we, I think, settle into this new normal for right now, establishing some sense of routine through the day is going to be really important. And for a lot of us, that might, if we're working from home, for example, it might look like still just keeping a regular bedtime and wake time, sticking to your normal morning routine in terms of having a shower, having breakfast, getting dressed, not just kind of rolling out of bed and staying in the same clothes all day, just because mentally, I think being in that space for a lot of people is really tough. And as you say, whether it's a puzzle, whether it's some actual work stuff, whether it's something that you've thought you wanted to do and you now have the time to do it, scheduling stuff in for the day and for the week can actually just keep us in a place where we still feel like we're kind of, like say, achieving things, getting through the week, and moving forward. So super important.
How, and this is kind of, again, I told you, go off on a tangent, but like, how like, not real, but like, how impactful is say what we would term as like seasonal depression, right? Like, how much does moving into winter really have, like, I don't know, how do I want to say it? Like, how impactful is it really? Like, is there a considerable factor that we almost need to be preparing for as we start to get colder? And I don't mean like preparing in that we're kind of taking COVID into like what is usually influenza season anyway. But how much in terms of like mental health, can we prepare for the fact that it's about to get colder, generally more miserable, less sunlight, less vitamin D, et cetera, et cetera?
and I guess from a seasonal kind of mood disorder side of things, like that's kind of that seasonal depression that we're talking about. And in terms of like a specific diagnosis for that, it's kind of a relatively, I guess, rarer subset of people with depression or mania will clearly fit a category where for them that is very much influenced by the season. And I guess a lot of the theories around that is that the levels of light and the amount of light that we're getting and the level of daytime hours each day affects chemicals in the brain that are responsible for our mood and things like that. And that's very much part of our biology. We know that light coming through our eyes is intimately involved in our sleep cycle and all of that side of things, but it also can impact our mood as well. So I think, for most of us, there's probably not obviously like a clearly biological trigger to that in terms of making us depressed, but levels of light and colder winter months and things can definitely impact our mood. And some of that may be, as you say, the sort of some of the social kind of consequences that come with that, in terms of we don't have as much time after work to be getting out in the park or going to the beach. It is a bit colder, which for a lot of people, they just generally find much less comfortable. And so those things, like if we take it back to the CBT model, in terms of what we're thinking and feeling about stuff, they kind of can flow through into our mental health. So I think if you are someone that notices during the winter months, you tend to sort of go down a little bit in your mood. It's thinking about maybe what are some of the impacts of winter, in terms of, like you say, we can't get out and about in the evening for that run, or time outside and the rooftop bars or whatever is off the cards because it's freezing in Melbourne and just raining 24/7. If those things kind of impact you, then it's maybe having a think as we come into winter about how you can structure your routine and your day so that some of those positive points are still there. And so that might be, scheduling a run or the exercise for a different time of the day. So trying that out in the morning, when we wake up, when it's light before work, or just like we've been doing with COVID, scheduling in social time that isn't necessarily being out at the rooftop bars in the sunlight. So I think it's often maybe more about that, in terms of how winter impacts our summer routines and getting out and about, and thinking about how we can kind of morph that into winter mode a little bit and still keep some of those things up that keep us feeling good.
Yeah. I mean, even from, I guess, a physician point of view, do you again, this is kind of like left field, but in terms of like where things are now and where things are sitting, like what do you foresee like things look like for the next kind of 2 to 3 months?
From the mental health side of
Yeah,
things?
from both, from like a mental health side, and I guess from like a physical health side too, and kind of just in terms of being involved in like the hospital system. Like, from what I understand, generally speaking, the spread of, or why we have influenza over like the colder months, tends to be because we do congregate more in closer groups in confined spaces, because it is so cold, right? So if all of a sudden we're not allowed to do that anyway, is there almost an anticipation that potentially like flu season might not be as detrimental on top of things as usual? Or have I just missed the boat completely on that one?
No, like I think 100%, if we're still obviously social distancing and still kind of in the phase that we're in now, obviously that would have flow-on effects to sort of transmission and rates of kind of flu and some of those other contagious type of illnesses as well. So it is obviously a concern, and we've seen that across different countries and parts of the world already, in terms of coming into flu season, and the impact that people getting sick with the flu might then also have on their severity of whether they got coronavirus on top of that as well. So that is a bit of a concern, I mean, coming into the winter months. And that's something that obviously the people much smarter and higher up the food chain than me in terms of, thinking about how long we're going to be social distancing for, what our lockdown laws are going to need to be looking like during the winter months, and how we're kind of monitoring what's happening with COVID. But yeah, I think as it kind of has been the whole way through with COVID-19, it's pretty hard to predict, I think, what kind of things are going to look like a month from now. It would be bloody nice if the lockdown laws and social distancing that we've brought in place in Australia, meant that in a month's time things are going to be looking much better from a risk side of things.
Just so they can reopen the gyms.
Really hard to know.
Right. Just lift the lockdown laws enough that we can reopen the gym.
Well, exactly. Like some way that we can just spray the gym down with like disinfectant and it'll still be safe. Like, yeah, that would be great.
Summer's still coming, right? Like summer's still 7 months away.
Exactly. No, you're preaching to the converted there. But no, I mean, I think it is going to be really important that's considered, coming into the winter months. And as hard as it is, having our regular routines and things locked down at the moment, what we don't want to do here is lift the lid too early, and have kind of rates of COVID transmission spring back up again. So I think on the COVID side of things and the physical side of things, it really is still a play-by-play process in terms of how that's going to play out. But on the mental health side of things, I mean, I honestly think it is a bit worrying in terms of how this is going to have flow-on effects to our mental health, even purely from the side of a lot of the economic and kind of business type impacts that all this has had as well. And we're already starting to see some of that in the hospital and in the mental health system. People have been really, really knocked for six in terms of their work, their employment, their businesses and stuff. And so it's a really hard time for people. And I think the longer this goes on for, the more we are going to need to be thinking about our mental health and the impacts there. And the more we're going to need to be pushing for people to get help and to reach out if they feel they need it.
Yeah. I think that, like, what I assume it makes, and what I've found to be the most difficult part of the whole situation is that it is so indefinite, right? It's not like we know that we're shooting for like 12 weeks and we've got 8 weeks to go and we can kind of like count it down and we're there, right? It is very much like, it might be 6 months, it might be 3, it might be 12, right?
Yeah, and that's the really hard thing as well, I think. Like, that's why a lot of us have been, I think, really understandably feeling anxious, tense, worried, a bit low about this because of that uncertainty, right? Like it's when we don't have someone being like, okay, if you just hold out till May the 1st, then the whole world's just going to click back into normal kind of functioning again. And sadly, I don't think from a medical side of things that's what's going to happen, obviously. But also just that uncertainty about what's going to happen, when things are going to start to feel a little more normal again, whether things are going to get better, whether they're going to get worse. That's a difficult space for our minds to be in, because we like an element of kind of certainty and predictability as well. And so, as you say, kind of not having that at the moment is pretty unsettling for a lot of us too.
Yeah. How can you kind of, combat that? Like, I think, a lot of what we've sort of touched on, a lot of those elements that do bring a lot of that uncertainty or anxiety, at the end of the day are just like elements that we have no control over the outcome anyway, right? Like there's, other than like staying at home, there's like literally nothing else that we can do to try to like fasten this up or hasten this process or get us to like the end. How do we, what can we do to try to like, I'm going to say reframe, but like try to draw more attention to, the elements of things that we can control, being active, going for walks, having routines, stuff like that.
Yep. Yep. Well, I think one of the points is exactly what you've just said. It's taking control of what we can control, and if that's putting some sense of routine into our day, keeping up physical activity, even if, you said before an example of a puzzle like that, that's still an element of the day that we can feel that we've kind of done something, we've had control over something, we've achieved something. Those things are really important. And I guess something that I've been talking to people a little bit about as well is, well, if things feel really uncertain right now and there's all this info overload and we've got this news channel saying lockdown's going to be 6 more weeks, and this news channel is saying, but hang on, in America they're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
I think another way to kind of just get rid of some of that overload and bring the kind of control back to us is to know that it's okay to limit a little bit of that stuff at the moment. So to not be scrolling through the news every second of the day, or to have it on the TV all day in the background. That can be a way to just kind of ease some of the noise and uncertainty, because there are, even for medical professionals, it's bloody hard at the moment to keep track of all the information that we're getting, all the different opinions about stuff, and that can be quite unsettling. So it's okay to limit some of that stuff, and not giving the CDC or the World Health Organization any kind of biased plug, but keeping ourselves grounded in guidelines and recommendations from places like that, as opposed to every Tom, Dick and Harry kind of influencer's opinion about COVID and lockdown on Instagram. I think when we get too many messages, it can make everything feel very uncertain and very unclear. So kind of focusing some of that stuff in and just, dialing the volume down a little bit is a good way to kind of feel like we're a little more grounded and in control of what's happening too.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Easy. Nice. Well, thank you, mate.
Easy. All good. I was going to say that makes it way easier said than done. I personally know that feeling.
Yeah, I guess, it's the flip side of the coin is you don't worry about the things you can control because you can control them. So what are you worried about, right?
Well, 100%. Yeah. And that's the biological part of our brain. I don't need to worry about what I can control because
I'm controlling it. Yeah.
That's not a lion about to kill me on the savannah like thousands of years ago. Why do I need to worry about that? Yeah. And you brought up mindfulness before, and again, I think it's awesome to see, especially for guys, becoming a little more open to that side of things too, because mindfulness and meditation isn't and doesn't have to be some kind of really kind of spiritual, sitting on the side of a cliff kind of airy fairy type thing. Even spending a minute or two practicing a mindfulness technique every day can actually have a big impact on just keeping us kind of present and grounded as well. And that's something that can have a bit of an impact on us just feeling like we have a little bit more control at the moment as well, if we're not constantly in that space where our mind is jumping ahead to, but what about this? And, what if I'm still in lockdown in 8 weeks? What am I going to do about that or that? So, being open to exploring a little bit of mindfulness stuff right now, which can just teach our mind to actually just stay a bit more grounded in the present, can be quite helpful for sort of settling some of that uncertainty as well.
Mm-hmm. Any resources you can recommend? Any sites, apps, books, anything like worth? Yeah.
I really like some of the mobile apps are great for mindfulness, and it's stuff that people know about these a lot already, but even in my clinics and things, I talk to patients about trying these out. So the Calm app is a really good one, and the Headspace app is a classic as well. They've been in the game for a long time now, and just have really kind of simple, clear, quite short exercises that if you do them every day can actually start to have a really powerful impact on anxiety levels and how we're sort of feeling on a day-to-day basis.
Push-ups for your mental health.
100%, man. It's like growing the biceps in your brain. Like, yeah, definitely. So I definitely talk to people about giving that a go, and kind of, I often say to patients, like, just humor me with it. Like, just humor me and give it a go for me, because I get that, you're going to be doing it for maybe a week and you're going to be like, this is rubbish. It's not doing anything. But it's keeping in mind that it's practicing this kind of stuff on a daily basis that starts to have the benefits. It's, it's just like if we're in the gym or you're doing a PT session with someone, they're not going to do a session with you, no matter how good of an amazing PT you are, mate. I'm sure after one session, people don't come out of it like absolutely jacked and like ready to run a marathon. I mean, they might do.
Yeah. I'm pretty good.
If you want to tag that in, that's fine. Yeah. But, it's the same thing. Yeah. These are things that we need to be kind of chipping away at consistently each day to be getting some of the mental kind of benefits from them as well. So, yeah, give some of those apps a go.
Yeah, I think that consistency over perfection approach, which we encourage people to take with diet, with activity, can also apply then to mental health as well. Easy. Perfect. All right, mate. Where can people find you? Where can they read everything you've written, listen to everything you've recorded?
So I have a webpage, and then I'm also on social media as well. On Instagram, it's just Dr. Kieran Kennedy, and I will freely admit to very much being a noob still when it comes to all the online kind of side of stuff, but that's where I throw up some of the links to the articles that I'm writing for things, and doing a little bit of work with like Men's Health magazine and stuff at the moment, talking about mental health and stuff like that. So
just on the cover, not just on the cover,
mate. Maybe if my home workouts can pick it up a notch, eh? But yeah, no, that's where people can check out any of this side of stuff if they're keen to. So but there's a ton of really great resources online, and doctors and stuff talking online about all this type of stuff as well. So if your appetite's whetted for it, then get into it.
Perfect. Well, thanks, mate. Thanks for making the time and sitting down with us. It's been an awesome conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, mate. Me too. And just thanks for, like you say, having this space to be open to talking about some of this stuff, because it's hugely important. So no, thanks heaps.
Easy. And look, I'd even be keen to make it somewhat semi-regularly and just kind of check in and see how things are getting on. Yeah, our man on the inside when it comes to all things men's mental health and stuff like that.
100%, mate. But we can talk exchanging for some free PT sessions to get me ready for that cover. So yeah, we can strike a deal.
Virtual PT, online PT. But hopefully it's not too long before the some of the lockdown lifts get kind of pulled back a little bit, and we can get an actual session in, mate. That's still on the cards.
Yeah, 100%. That's the goal. That's the goal.
All right, awesome. Thank you, mate.
Thank you very much, man. It's a pleasure, and look forward to chatting again soon.
Perfect.